All right, we are recording. Welcome, everyone. I will share a recording with you and I will share our slides with you. This training will be appropriate for folks who've never done voter registration before, but we'll also try to, give some new ideas, some COVID specific ideas for folks who have done voter registration before. And my name's Mia Lewis. I'm with Indivisible Ohio District 12. And Barb Fleeter, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Barb Fleeter, and I also work with Mia a lot on voter registration and training and all of that. And I'm in Clintonville, part of OH12.
And then Scott Salzman is also gonna, you want to say hi, Scott?
Good evening. Hi. I live in Hilliard, not in 12 proper, but I've gotten linked up with all these folks because I do a lot of voter registration in the past and have been pretty active on this project as well, which is moving along quite nicely.
Great. And I think Laura Kuykendall is also going to, join us and say a few words. Laura?
Hi, Laura Kirkendall from Worthington. I've been working with Indivisible Ohio 12 since, I don't know, 2016 maybe. Yeah, done a lot of voter registration. I am also one of the Spanish speaking volunteers for that.
Awesome. Okay, well, I recognize lots of people here and you all are awesome. And I know that you have done lots and lots, but it's great because we can share tips with each other and, everybody knows something different and we can share it and figure out the best thing that we can do for these last, I think it's 26 days, something scary like that. We don't have a lot of time, so we really have to make the very best possible use of every day that we possibly can. And that means committing to do something ourselves, but also trying to get folks who aren't doing anything, trying to get everyone we know who's, out there saying how terrible the situation is to do some work as well, because we need it. All right, I'm gonna share my screen and we're gonna start in on our presentation for the evening. And what we plan to do is go through the presentation pretty quickly, and then we'll have plenty of time for discussion and questions at the end. So hold your questions. It's fine if you want to put them in the chat, and then we'll kind of collect them. You can also put them in the Q&A if there is one, and we'll kind of go through them. This picture makes me sad because it reminds me of how much fun we had in the past couple of years doing voter registration out at Pride and other festivals, and we really couldn't do that at all this year because there weren't any. So we're trying to figure out what to do instead, and we're putting our heads together and figuring out how to do this. So who can register people to vote in Ohio? Anybody can. There are literally no restrictions. You don't have to be a citizen. You don't have to be 18. You can be a felon. There are no restrictions. But it really works well if you know how to do it. So, and registering people to vote is really, really easy, but there are lots of small ways to get it wrong. So we want to make sure you know all those things so that you can do it with confidence and do it correctly, and make sure that that person who you've interacted with who believes that they're registered really is registered when they go to vote on election day or go to vote early. Who can you register in Ohio? They have to be a citizen. They have to be an Ohio resident, and they have to be 18 years old by November 3rd. Those are basically your restrictions, and we'll talk about a couple of other things as we go along. Again, pop questions in the chat. We'll try to get back to them. And I'll go fairly quickly, but if I'm going too fast, just, say stop. You're going too fast. So this page right here is basically all you need to know. You need to fill out the form. You need a highlighted form, which luckily they're actually giving us highlighted forms now at the Board of Elections, which is completely altered all of our lives. We're so excited. You need to fill out all the fields that are highlighted, and if they're filled out and they're legible, then that's it. You've done it. You've done the registration. So let's look over this field, this form really carefully. So the top line you'll notice isn't highlighted. Sometimes they're highlighted, but they're not. It's not required to say whether you're registering someone for the first time or whether it's an address update or whatever. That's not required. You can put it if you want. What is required is to say that the person is a citizen and that they're 18 years of age. And there's absolutely, if we don't have that citizenship box checked, that's it, we're done. We have to have that. We can't assume the person is a citizen. If we check it on their behalf, we may be committing a felony in their name. And so we can't do that. We can't check that box. So we must make sure we check that box, that we ask the person and they check that box. Last name, first name, middle initial. I usually say do it the same way as your driver's license. You know, if it's an initial in your driver's license, keep it that same way. Your current address, including your apartment number. Very, very important to do apartment number in case they are going to have their ballot mailed to them. City, zip, this is county. Birth date, last four of your social or your Ohio driver's license. You can't use an out-of-state driver's license or a state ID. Phone number.
You can't use a state ID.
Sorry, you can use a state ID. Sorry. Yeah, so license or a state ID. Phone number, we don't always highlight it, but it's great to have in case there's a problem. The date and the signature. Yes, people can fill out their previous registered address if they're updating, but it's not required. If it's within the same county, you don't have to at all. If you've moved from a different county or a different state, it's nice. It helps clean up the rolls, but if you're in a rush, you don't have to do it. So let's just go over the things on this side here. So use a highlighted form, use blue or black pen. Don't fill this out with pencil or with red ink or purple ink or orange ink, blue or black pen. Help the person and guide them as they write. So what that means is you don't well, you know what? I guess that's a little bit different during COVID. If we're doing drive-through voter registration, you may have to do that. But if you're actually standing in front of the person, you want to follow along as they are filling out the form and be kind of watching, maybe pointing with a pen, a second pen to each box and making sure that they're doing it carefully and correctly. Tell people to slow down. It has to be legible. So that's very, very important. Check the form before they leave. That's just so important. You can change anything, update anything. They're not fussy if someone needs to scratch something out or they need to say, you know, actually that's my first name, that's my last name, and put an arrow and initial it. You can do any of that when the person is there. You're not supposed to write on it when the person is not there, obviously. So, you know, checking it over before the person leaves is very important. I'll also just mention that if the person who's filling out the form has difficulty writing for any reason, you are allowed to complete the form for them. They obviously have to sign by themselves, but it's fine for you to fill out the form. It's not generally a great idea to hand in 100 forms that all look identical because you've filled them all. That really looks kind of strange, but if you have one person who for some reason seems to need help, don't be shy to offer to help them fill out the form. Make the corrections before they leave and tell them that they are going to get a piece of mail from the Board of Elections at their home, confirming their registration. If it's an update, confirming their new registration, telling them what ID to bring, telling them where their polling place is, we hope, because those may change right before Election Day. You want to tell them that so that if it doesn't come, they know something is up and they have an opportunity to call their Board of Elections and check and see what's going on. So that's it, guys. Now you know how to register voters. We can all go home. That's it. That's the, the important thing. Sorry. Common mistakes. Incomplete citizenship. Very, very important. We can figure out the age thing. If they've got their birth date on there, we can figure out whether they're 18 or not. We can't guess if they're a citizen. So that's really important. Make sure that they've put those last 4 of the social in. And if it's a driver's license, that they've put the complete thing. A driver's license in Ohio is 2 letters and 6 numbers. So if someone does use driver's license, you want to look at it and then just say, is that got everything that it needs before they leave? Date. So make sure that they haven't put today's date in the birth date or their birth date in today's date. Those can sometimes get mixed up. Make sure that it's signed. Legible handwriting is really important. County, not country. Again, that's something that, we can fix, or the Board of Elections can easily fix if needed. It's the things like the birth date, the last 4 of the social, and the citizenship and legibility. Those are the things that we can't fix. And just, imagine if someone writes something that looks like their name is Kendra, but it's really Kenta. Well, when the Board of Elections puts that in the system, if they put it in incorrectly, when the person goes to vote, they won't be able to vote. So that's why it's so important you be able to read it. Generally speaking, you don't need anything in line 7, which is the voting address. You don't, put a PO box. The only reason that you use that line, and it's not even really worth saying, is like if you cannot receive mail where you live, you need to put where you live so they can tell what district you're in, and then you put a mailing address, which is a different thing, in order to be able to receive mail. But that's an unlikely scenario. Okay.
Can I jump in for
Yeah,
1
please.
second?
Please.
So even if, let's say you did all this, you checked, and then later it's like, oh my God, they don't have this or that, still turn it in. Like, don't just assume, oh, this is bad, and destroy it. It still needs to get turned in, and let the Board of Elections try to contact them and cure it. That's what they'll do.
Absolutely. And we'll talk a little bit later about how to try to get information that is missing. But even if you have a form, we're kind of a little picky about it. Like if you have a form that you're filling out wrong and it's half filled out, I never like to see a half filled out voter registration form in the trash. It just looks sketchy. So we just turn them in, we put void on it, and we turn them in along with all the others, because we just don't want to anybody to imagine that we're doing something like registering some voters and not registering others. You wouldn't want to get accused of that. So you just turn everything in. Okay, so what do we say when we're approaching voters? Often people say, are you registered to vote? But actually, strangely enough, that's like the one thing that really isn't a good thing to say, because people are a little defensive about it, because they feel like they're, they've messed up if they haven't. So instead of that, we want to be really outgoing. You can't be shy and register people to vote. Make it sound like an opportunity. Have you moved since you last voted? Do you need to check your registration? Are you turning 18 by November 3rd? Do you need an absentee ballot? Can I give you this flyer about tracking your ballot? Anything that, sounds like you're giving them an opportunity to do something. Even just the checking is important. So don't be shy. And one thing we're doing at the moment, now remember in Ohio, we have 3 ways to vote. We can vote on election day, we can vote early. We have 4 weeks of early voting, and we can vote by mail, no fault absentee. And so we're really offering that opportunity to all of these opportunities to people. I'm not really at this point pushing absentee ballots, but we can offer them to people to see if they want them. Not that we're discouraging them from voting early or voting on election day, but we're giving it to them as an option. And again, we will have highlighted forms. And so this one is wrong. This got fixed. I'm sorry, this is not how your forms will be. Date of birth will be highlighted. The fields that need to be filled out are highlighted. Just so you understand the form, the address here in field 3 is the place where the person is registered. And if they just want the ballot sent to their home, they're done. They don't need to put another address. If they're not going to be at home and they need the ballot mailed to a different place from where they're registered, that's when they fill out number 4, which is where they want to receive the ballot. But if it's their regular registered address, they leave it the same. And then it's just the 2 choices for ID, again, are the Ohio license number or state ID or the last 4 of the social.
Can I jump in?
Sure.
Can I jump in here, Mia? Actually, there were some forms that had number 3 checked, and then people did not fill in the other stuff. Number 3 does not mean do you have an ID. It's talking about physically attaching one, which no one is going to be doing. So never, never, never should 3 be used.
Yeah, when she says 3 means the 3rd box in number 5. So you're only going to be checking the 1st box or the 2nd box, and just pretend that 3rd box is not there. So, you know, that's good to know. And then the general election should already be pre-checked and the date filled in. If it isn't, you can write it in. Signature, today's date, and then do put in the phone number and email address. It helps when the board needs to get in touch with you. You know, one thing that's really, really important, though, to know is that many people think they're registered when they're not, and many people think that they're registered at their current address when they're not. So you really want to avoid filling out an absentee ballot application for someone when you haven't actually double checked that they're registered, actively currently registered, and that they're registered where they think they are. Because if the Board of Elections gets this form and then they look the person up and they're not there, there's nothing they can do. They can't retroactively register the person. They can try to get in touch with them, but that may or may not work. So we have a way that we check people's registrations that we'll show you in a little bit, but just keep that in mind, that those 2 things go together as much as you possibly can. Yes, you can do a registration and an absentee ballot application at the same time. We like to clip them or staple them together because, again, if the absentee ballot application were to get there first somehow, or to be first in a long pile, and the person at the BOE types it in and they don't find a registration, they put it aside, and then that causes a problem. So keep those together. And then also make sure that you let people know that they can track this ballot. There's a way through voteohio.gov and through the County Board of Elections to find out if your ballot application has been received, and to find out when your ballot has been mailed, and to find out if your ballot that you've completed and mailed back has been received and is going to be counted and is accepted. And we don't really want people to fill these out and then just think everything's fine and they're not paying attention. And in fact, it hasn't been accepted for some reason. They didn't sign it or they didn't fill it out properly. We also want people to understand that voting from home is a great option, but it isn't like your backup. It isn't that you do it and then you also go vote in person. No, despite what Donald Trump says, no, we don't do that. If we decide to vote by mail, then we follow through and we vote by mail. If there's some catastrophe and you don't get your ballot, or you spoil it and you don't have time to get a second one, because you can apply for a second ballot if you've spoiled your ballot. If there's some catastrophe, you can go and vote provisionally, but it's not really recommended. Those votes get counted last. It's a pain. You have to go to a separate table. It's a hassle for the people at the Board of Elections. So it's kind of one way or another. Make your decision how you want to vote. and follow through on that way of voting.
Yeah.
Yes.
When you vote provisionally, do people have to sometimes go actually to follow up at the Board of Election, or do you know what circumstances are where they have to actually follow up at the Board of Election?
Yes, they'll let you know. You basically fill out a whole paper, and then they let you know if there's something that you need to still bring, and then you have a certain amount of time to cure that provisional ballot.
Okay.
And there's a way that you can track that as well. They give you information about it, like what the phone number is, where you call, and all of that. But it is definitely not the best way to vote. I don't recommend it. I also want to make sure that even though our deadline for applying for an absentee ballot in Ohio is the Saturday before Election Day, it's kind of fictional, because even if you were to hand that in to the Board of Elections and they were to mail you a ballot, let's say on Monday, it's not going to get to you in time for you to be able to vote that ballot and turn around and drop it off at your Board of Elections on Election Day. So you really don't want to encourage people to fill out one of these absentee ballot requests closer than 10 days before an election, or even 2 weeks, I would say. Despite the fact that you're allowed to, it's just not a great idea. Of course, if you fill it out and you drop it off at the Board of Elections, where there is a drop box, one per county, that does speed things up a bit. They're still going to mail you your ballot, but then you can physically deliver it to the Board of Elections. And we'll go over this again, but just so you know, so you can pass on correct information, you have to, on Election Day, you cannot submit your absentee ballot at your precinct. They cannot accept ballots at your precinct. You have to bring it to the Board of Elections. You can put it in the drop box, but you cannot bring it to your precinct polling place.
Or mail it, so long as it's postmarked that day.
No, you have to have it postmarked by Monday.
Oh, Monday, okay.
And the problem with that is that often if you put something in a mailbox, it isn't postmarked until the day before, and things aren't going to get postmarked on Sunday. So it really means you have to have it in a mailbox at the very latest on Saturday. So honestly, I would say don't mail it closer than 4 or 5 days before an election. And even so, I would go into the post office and have it postmarked, because it has to be postmarked. And some mail, this is the law. If it arrives by Election Day and it's unpostmarked, it's counted. If it arrives after Election Day, and absentee ballots can arrive up to 10 days after Election Day. If it arrives after Election Day and it's not postmarked, it's not counted. Even if you put it in the mail a week before Election Day and it went to Detroit for sorting and it came back and it never got postmarked, and there is mail that is never postmarked, that ballot will not count. So you need to bring it into the post office, you need to see them postmark it, and you have to put it in the mail at least, I'm going to say, 5 days before the election. So that's why I want more drop boxes, but you know,
And
yeah.
just to, when you'll be going over a little bit later, or at least giving reference to a handout that will have a lot of this information on it, so people don't have to be frantic right now trying to make sure that they just got all of that.
Absolutely. We have a handout which is called Now What? I don't know if you can see it, but it's basically everything that I just said, when you're going to get your ballots, how you return your ballots, what the suggested deadlines are. So we don't want people to panic, but we also want to make sure that, you know, that they're taking care of their ballots and they're tracking them and they're paying attention, because really that would be the nightmare, is that we all decide to vote by mail and we kind of aren't paying attention, and you know, those ballots kind of go astray. All right, here we go. There's the Now What flyer. So we want to make sure they know that they can track their ballot. We want to mention when the ballots will be mailed. That starts on October 6th. And we want to talk about the ways you can return the ballot. And we have these flyers. They're available on my porch. They're on all the clipboards now. If you have an old clipboard and you want to trade it in for a newer clipboard that has some of these newer things on it, you're welcome to do so. You can come to my porch. We'll talk about this later. Some of the events will have a lead, someone there who has all these supplies, but generally speaking, we want you to show up at events with supplies. So keeping on. Okay, I talked earlier about helping people check their registration, particularly if they're filling out an absentee ballot. It's super, super simple. If you have a smartphone, you just go to voteohio.gov, and you can try this now. Honestly, it really isn't complicated. So if you go to voteohio.gov, which I will do, which I have a cheaty way of going to because basically my phone is always open to voteohio.gov. It has a message about needing poll workers right now. So you just say hide this message, which is at the bottom. And then underneath there, you'll see some options. And one of the options is check my voter registration. So you see on the screen here, you can see that these options, and the one at the bottom there is check my voter registration. So once you click on check my voter registration, all you have to put in is the person's first name, last name, and county. Now, if they have an unusual name, they're probably going to be the only one that pops up. If it pops up, you need to click on it, you need to touch it and click on it and make sure that all is good with that registration. Because if they're on a list to be purged, it'll come up and it'll say confirmation status. And you don't, if it says confirmation status, they're good to vote this time, but you want to recommend that they re-register just to make sure that they get off of confirmation status. If they have a common name, let's say they have a middle common name, like my name. So in Franklin County, there are 3 Mia Lewises. I find that kind of amazing, but whatever. I guess my name isn't as unusual as I thought. And you can find the one that's you, or if none of them are you, then you know you have to register. Or maybe you find yourself, but you see that it's a wrong address. Then you know you have to update your address. If you don't see yourself at all, then it's possible that you registered in a different county, or you've been purged. And when I say you, I mean the person that you're helping, or maybe they're looking on their own phone. You tell them to look. So if you don't show up and it's not the correct address and or it says confirmation status, then you want that person to fill out a new registration form. And this is a really good idea to do. Sometimes you won't have time, and so you encourage them to do it themselves. But to the best of your ability, let's try to check people's registrations. Barb, anything to add?
No.
Okay.
We started doing that at the beginning of at the drive-through food pantry events. We've started having a designated person actually doing the checking of the address, the voter registration address first. It's one of the modes we'll do, and then 2 other people follow up as the car moves along the queue and does the voter registration or change of address.
That's great. Yeah, I think it's a great idea. If we have the people, we'd really like to do this. Okay, so just a couple of quick things before we start talking about drive-through voter registration and stuff. For those who haven't done registration before, you might not know that in Ohio, we actually have one of the better laws that unless you're currently serving time for a felony conviction, you're allowed to vote. You're allowed to vote on probation, on parole. You're allowed to vote if you're awaiting trial. You're allowed to vote if you're in jail for a misdemeanor. And there are people, really great people, who are working incredibly hard to figure out how to get to those folks who are in jail and help them to register and vote. And it is not easy, let me tell you, and COVID is not making it easy. But the thing about this is most people who have been in prison and convicted of a felony, they believe strongly, probably because they have been told that they cannot vote, and they do not know that they are allowed to register. So if somebody says to you, oh, I can't vote, a nice thing to say is, oh, okay, well, unless you're currently serving unless you're not a citizen, or you're not 18, or you're currently serving a conviction for a felony, in Ohio, everyone's allowed to vote. You have to re-register. And countless times people have said, oh, I didn't know that. I thought I wasn't allowed to vote. So it's a really important thing to mention. Don't be embarrassed by it. Don't let the other person be embarrassed by it. Don't say like, oh, are you a felon? But honestly, I think we find that more weird and scary than the person does. And just be straight up, like, unless you're currently serving a conviction, and you know, it's not impossible. There's like 1 out of a million, you'll find somebody who is in a halfway house and has like 1 week left on their actual conviction and they are actually serving it. They have an ankle bracelet or something. But generally speaking, no, if you're talking to them, they're allowed to vote. So unless they're not a citizen. And a couple of things for younger voters. We're really, like in past years, we've focused on campus and we just aren't at all this year. So I'm not going to go into this at length, but just really quickly, if you're 17, but you're going to be 18 by election day, you can register. Paper forms are often better for younger people because they might not have that ID or they might not have had it for a while. It's good to use the last 4 of the social, because, well, at least for Ohio State students, sometimes they have out-of-state licenses, so we want to use those last 4 of the social. They do have a choice where they register, whether it's a campus address or their parents' address. During COVID, what should they do? Search me. I have no idea. Where will they be on election day? I do not know. If their parents' house is close by, I would say register at home, and then at least and do an absentee ballot and get that absentee ballot at home, and then the parents can drive it to them if they're still on campus or something. Just help them think it through. You know, the good thing about registering on campus is then you can vote there and you don't have to do the whole absentee thing. But if you're worried that the school may close down by then, you know, you can request an absentee ballot, you know, right up towards the end. So just remember, you request that absentee ballot from whichever county where you have registered. So if you're from Cleveland, but you register in Columbus, and then you go home and you're at home, you're requesting the ballot from Franklin County, and they would mail it to you over there. You know, your guess is as good as mine as to like what will actually happen. And just to remind you, like, this is not so much for this situation, but in general, if you have time, don't assume people know anything about voting or elections. You know, tell them that there are different, that it's not just president, that we vote for lots of different things. And there are elections every year, and there are primaries in the spring, and then there's a general election. This next button, if you work for or are volunteering for a nonpartisan organization, obviously you have to be nonpartisan. If you are an employee of the League of Women Voters or a volunteer for the League of Women Voters, that's a hugely important part of what you do. But if you're not, it's fine. There's no law, there's nothing like illegal about being partisan. I mean, partisan groups go out and do voter registration drives all the time. And in fact, when you identify your partisan, when you show your partisan identity, your studies show you're going to have 17% more people will register because they know who you are and they have more trust in who you are. And so sometimes we might actually wear like a Biden button, or, you know, I mean, it's fine. We're not employees of, I mean, I am actually, but if I'm doing it on my own time, you know, so it depends. If you are organizing a drive with League of Women Voters, then of course you have to be nonpartisan. If you're doing something with Indivisible, you don't have to be. And you can put a, you know, love is love button, or a, you know, climate change is important button, or something, or, you know, dump Trump button, and that will identify who you are, and that will make sure that, you know, you're not out there working really hard to register folks who are going to end democracy as we know it, or, you know, cause the world to end, which is kind of what the stakes are. So keep that in mind, and you know, it's kind of a personal thing. It's up to you what you feel comfortable with. but certainly we want to be sure that anything that we're doing as Indivisible is not helping. I mean, anyone that wants, I will register anyone that comes to me, of course, and I will treat that with great respect and absolutely equally. But I'm going to try to pick places to register and situations where to register, neighborhoods, events, where it's the voters that I'm concerned about making sure that they're registered and that they vote. That's really important because we don't have time. You know, the stakes are too high here for anything else. The rest of this is kind of self-explanatory. It's nice to work in pairs. Equip your clipboard, sorry. And you'll have all of this stuff. So you'll see. Oh, I also wanted to show you that I have a new thing on the clipboard, which is the early vote hours. So everyone will have early vote hours. And whenever there's something that voters need to know, if you don't have a handout, they can take a picture. It's probably even better than a flyer because they're not going to lose it. So take a picture of the early vote hours. We also always have on our clipboards this form, which is really great. Can you see that?
No.
Sorry. Oh, well, I'll share it afterwards. I'll stop sharing my screen. Which there's a form right at the back of the clipboard, which has information about what ID you need to bring and when there are elections and the URL for voteohio.gov. And so that's all really helpful. Okay, now I am actually we have 2 ways that we're signing people up, and Barb's gonna tell you a little bit more about that. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen for a minute so I can actually show you these signups, but generally speaking, we have this tabbed Sign Up Genius, and then we have this registration list by date. So I'm gonna just, show you how those work. Barb, do you want to tell us a little bit about this Sign Up Genius?
So what we've done here is we wanted to have just one link that people could get into because so that they didn't have to keep remembering different links for possible signups. So we have this one link, this summer fall link, and it's a tabbed list. And the first tab is really overall information, and it gives, it highlights some of the things we're doing to be COVID safe. And it also highlights what to bring. It talks a little bit about some of the different types of events that you might be signing up for. And then nicely, it's got links to these slides, and then also a recording of this training. Now this is a training, the recording right there is the training we did in June. We'll probably replace it with this recording because it's just got a little bit more up-to-date information. So this is just an example. Right now, we've taken the big, huge list that we have and we've narrowed it down to 3 right now, trying to help people focus because it was a bit overwhelming. The first 2 are drive-through food pantries. So they're drive-through events. I know a couple people will be talking a little bit more about them, but nobody is getting out of the cars. You're walking up to cars and you're interacting that way. The first one is St. Stephen's, which is in kind of the North Linden off of 17th Avenue. So it's a nice target community for us. And the people there are good to work with. And I think it's got a good setup. The second one, and again, if you look at the signups, it'll have a number of spots which are just for like, I'm the person that's asking about VR or absentee ballots. And then we've added this registration checker slot, which Scott talked about, which is a person that can have that smartphone and be the person asking and checking registrations and then letting the people doing registrations themselves not have to worry about that. So this second one is on the Parsons Avenue. It's a huge food pantry. It runs 6 days a week, a lot of time slots. And so those are 2 of the ones that we're focusing people on, in addition to Bronzeville, which is a really nice event in Bronzeville. It only runs on Thursdays. Joe runs that one, Joe Knapp. He will have a table set up, so it's a little bit different kind of an event. So that's one where if you want to go somewhere where there's a presence like that, this is a really good event to go at. He'll have supplies. It would probably help for you to bring your own clipboard and all of that. But it's a table set up, and so you're interacting with the crowd right there in person in a COVID safe way, hopefully. So those are the signups. And then as these fill up, there are other opportunities, and we'll put in more opportunities. Okay, do you want to talk about this, which is what you're doing, or do you want me to talk through the COVID safe stuff?
Well, this is just another way of organizing the same information. It's the voter registrations listed by date. In fact, it's not as necessary now because we boiled this one down to just the most important. But you know, earlier today there were like 12 or 15 different tabs, and so it was a little overwhelming. So we organized them by date, so we can have, you know, what are the things that are happening Tuesday, what are the things that are happening Wednesday. So, you know, you'll have access to both of these links, and you can go through and see what works for you. But again, there'll be things in here that are actually more than the others, and maybe we'll actually pair some of those out as well. But what we can do is, you know, let's say this St. Stephen's fills up completely, and then the Church for All Peoples fills up completely, then we can add back in. We still have those other tabs all organized. And these are things that Scott has organized with the food pantries. They know that we're coming, they're expecting us. And so we're all kind of above board and legit. And, but it's really just a question that we want to focus, and we want to make sure that we're not spreading ourselves too thin. It's better to have 3 people at one pantry and do a really good job than to have one person each at 3 different pantries and no one knows what they're doing, and they're like, it's too difficult to do by yourself, et cetera, et cetera. So that's basically the idea.
And all the pantries I approached as I was setting these up were quite enthusiastic about us coming in to do this. They thought this is great. This is a great service to their clientele. So I think when you interact with the folks at the food pantry and introduce yourself, there's already a positive vibe.
We may find something, I mean, Laura mentioned this today, that, you know, someone may show up who you're not expecting. They may have seen the sign up somewhere and not signed up, but they just show up or something. So, you know, just be flexible. You know, we don't own the space. We're happy to share any, you know, we're all working towards the same thing. And if somebody there is put out or whatever, you can say that, you know, we arranged it with the pantry, so it should be fine.
And the other thing just to mention briefly is if you look in like descriptions of each of these types of events, there actually is some good information. Like if you go to the St. Stephen's tab, or this is just the thing, but if you went there, sorry, you're not there anymore. There's a description of kind of what to expect there. The person in charge of, from the pantry's point of view, is you typically reference. So if you need to know that maybe it's Rebecca there, I can't remember, but that's in there. So it's good to read the description so that you have a feeling for what the event is.
And also, Barb is going to send out an email a day or 2 in advance to everyone who's signed up for each pantry to just remind them, maybe even let them know who else. I mean, you can see on the sign up who else is signed up, and we can put you in touch with each other and everything. Okay, I'm going to speed up because I see that it's already 1:45 and we have stuff we need to go through. So Barb, do you want to talk about COVID safety?
Yeah, these are things that we came up with. So obviously always wear a mask. We recommend carrying wipes and or hand sanitizer. I mean, the hand sanitizer is just a good policy for yourself, but also if you're sharing the pen or the clipboard amongst people, we want it to be cleaned in between use so that when you're handing something to somebody, it's a clean situation. So either use a pen, for example, use a pen just once, if possible, or clean it.
I always just use the pen once. I mean, we have enough pens. I just always tell them to keep the pen.
Yeah. And stationary events are actually when you can have them, having a small, so the drive-throughs are different, but when you have an event that's more of a you know, a stationary, a festival or something, having a small table is actually really nice because then you can keep yourself maybe a little bit extra COVID safe, because you can set the table up, you can have the hand sanitizer there, you have just a little bit more natural distance, and you can still see what they're doing. We also have these large posters with the QR code or even smaller ones so people can do a touchless registration online if they have a, you know, if they've had a driver's license for a long time. So that's that. So the drive-through registrations, again, we have almost always gotten permission to be there. And that's important to know in case, I don't know, it's just good to know that we're not just showing up and trying to fit into something, especially in a drive-through situation. If you're the first person there, you might just want to make contact with somebody to say, hey, we're here, we're doing this. As far as strategy to do, it really is going to depend on, I think, the particular pantry or whatever the event is and how they have it set up. So sometimes there's a line of cars in and it's set up in a way that one person can hand forms at the beginning and another one picks them up at the end. Sometimes that's not how it's set up, and so one person is kind of following a car. Typically, you have to be really aware of what the actual event is doing with their cars and not get in their way, so not slow down a line. We talked before about checking registrations, especially helpful if you have an extra person whose job that is, and they can do that. As much as possible, checking that form as thoroughly as you can before they leave. And Mia's talked about that. That's really important. Hand them the now what forms if they have requested, if they've filled out that absentee ballot request. Some places, if they aren't done filling it out, there are situations where you can say, hey, why don't you pull into this parking slot and I'll come and get it for you. And some pantries or events, you can't do that too. So you'll just have to be flexible about what the event space is and what works.
Yeah, so you'll work it out as a team when you're there and you'll just do your best. Anything we do is better than nothing. So never, you know, never stress that we're not doing it perfectly.